Hi everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this first More to Life webinar of 2020 entitled Marking Our Full Stop. Now the subject tonight won't fail to inspire us all to make the most of our existing talents and develop new ones as we search for meaning in our lives without children. Now we're going to hear about the journey that collectively Berenice Smith, hi Berenice.
Hi everybody.
Michael Hughes, hi Michael.
Hi everyone.
And Sarah Lawrence, hi Sarah.
Hi all.
Have all been on together. Now, Michael, you are quite a long way away tonight, I believe, and more importantly, what an earthly time of the day is it for you there?
Well, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, so I'm actually in the future, Wednesday morning, in Mareeba, far north Queensland.
Wow,
Can't get any further around the other side of the earth than this.
Wow, everybody, that just shows your commitment, doesn't it? Now, it's our absolute pleasure to have you all here tonight to hear about your very successful joint venture, the Full Stop podcast. Now, we're always interested in hearing about how passions can become new ventures here at More to Life. So it will be good to hear about the commitment required and the personal benefits that you've all gained from doing this. Now, this webinar tonight, before we start to hear about this, won't take the usual format that you're used to here at Live. Instead, you can submit questions tonight at any time as we go along. And when I can get a word in, you'll see me doing this, just lifting my hand, and I'll try and ask the questions for you as they come in. Now, to submit questions, simply hover your cursor at the bottom of the screen and a toolbar should appear. Click on Q&A and type away. Please select the anonymous function to prevent any personal data being disclosed, because this session will be recorded tonight and it will be watched by others later. Okay, I think it is time to hear about how you made your mark with your Full Stop podcast. Berenice, first of all, do you want to set the scene by describing a typical Full Stop podcast episode?
I'm really glad you struggle with saying that because I do too. You are. Oh dear, an episode. Well, an episode begins, we go right back to the very beginning of an episode, I suppose, with ideas. So one of the things that's really important to us is that it's guided by our listeners. We have a vague kind of plan of what we should be talking about and some episode ideas, but we are very much guided by the feedback that we get. So that's by emails or on social media, and things pop up in the news as well. So we fiddle around a bit with the episode order. We have a think about guests that would really benefit from being on the podcast, but also our listeners will benefit as well. And with any luck, we're all free at the right time, on the right day. As you can tell with Michael being in Australia, sometimes that takes a bit of doing. Our episode that's coming up was the first one that's been broadcast or recorded rather across 3 continents, so we're quite proud of the next one that's coming up. So we have all of that to think about first, and then once the episode starts, then it's all done exactly like this. In fact, it's identical to this. It's all Zoom based. The difference is that of course we export out the audio, and we don't have any images at all for that, and it's edited as well. So we Michael very capably looks after all of the editing for us. So we all have a part that we play in it, but that's typically how it happens. And we just talk, it's very informal. It's great if we have some bio from our guests beforehand so we can get to know them, but invariably one of us will already know the guests, if not all 3 of us. We've had lots of people that we know already on the podcast, and of course we're constantly meeting new people as well.
So, I mean, how did it all come about in the first place?
I met Sarah through some webinars that we were doing with the lovely Steph from World Childless Week, and I met Michael the previous May when you flew over to the UK for Fertility Fest at the Shepherd's Bush Theatre, and immediately just had this connection with all of you, both of you. And I thought there's potential for something. It's got to be, you know. And I'd always wanted to do a podcast. It was just something I'd always fancied having a bash at, but I didn't want to do it on my own. I'm just too scared. And I thought no one's going to want to listen to me talking on my own. That would just be terrible. I don't like listening to myself talking to myself either, so I don't want anybody else should. So I thought, I know who would be good at this. And that was sort of it. And I contacted you first, Sarah, I think. And we thought about that proposal, didn't we, for the Rachel Bland Award, the BBC Rachel Bland Award.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, really, wasn't it? It's weird how it happened. It just kind of like osmosis almost, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
If I'm honest, it wasn't really planned out. I mean, it's been going less than a year, hasn't it? And kind of what we didn't want was we didn't want three of the same voices. We were very conscious that Berenice and I have a kind of a similar background, you know, we're both female, both white. So we kind of wanted a fella on there because we were conscious that, you know, the guys, although we feel invisible, I think the guys are perhaps more invisible because there's less voices. So we really wanted like a loud, brash Australian accent, really, to to really get the message across.
Yeah. And handily, I knew someone just that fitted that. It's like, oh look, there he is, and he's regretted meeting me ever since.
But yeah, that was it really. And so we had a chat with Michael, and it just kind of worked, didn't it?
Yeah.
We just seemed to hit it off, and it seemed to, you know, the friendship has really, we've got a lot closer, I think, as time has gone on. I think Michael said it, didn't you? You listened to the first one we ever did, and we all sound really nervous. But it's kind of, it seems to have gelled more as we've gone along.
Wasn't there a competition that we entered, or tried to enter at the beginning as well?
Yeah, it was the BBC Rachel Bland Award. So for those that don't know, Rachel was a presenter on the Big C podcast, which is part of BBC Radio 4, and they had a award. She passed away very sadly from breast cancer, and the BBC said, "Oh, we're going to do this award in her honour, and you can submit your podcast." And Sarah and I wrote, I think, most of the proposal. Then I think at that point we decided that we had a plan, but we needed this extra voice, and that was you, Michael. And you came at the end, but you looked at all of that, and I think we submitted it. We didn't get anywhere. Their loss. Sodom BBC. Who cares? And I think at that point we thought we've got something here. Because I think, like anything, I was talking to somebody about this on a business thing about the podcast and how we set it up, and I think it is very much like you have to have a slight sense of businessness about it, because you've got to think about why you're doing it, what's it for, and are you just doing it to sort of, you know, fill some time, or do you actually is there a motivation to this, and what it is. And that was, Michael, I think you wrote the mission statement. I remember you wrote that, and I just thought that was amazing, and that's on our website, which was really important to us, because it basically does focus very much on the listener.
Yeah, the community.
I mean, at Modern Life, we're always saying how important it is to find your tribe and to spend time with people who understand what you're going through, etc. And it's obvious that the three of you do have this special connection, and that has helped you to succeed in what you're doing.
We're always talking. I mean, we're always chatting. The messenger. Oh God, God! You said to me, Mr. Hughes, and you, Sarah. You said, well, what are we talking about this evening? And it's somewhere up there in this great big messenger thing, and I don't know where it is. Someone has to go and find it. And we also have Slack as well, so we do an awful lot of organisation on Slack behind the scenes. So we've got episode lists and things, and notes and stuff, and lessons learned as well. But yeah, we get on really well. There's not much we don't know about each other now, sadly. There'll be more.
Yes.
Go on, Michael, talk. Say something. I know it's 6 a.m. Come on.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the bullet point now that I was supposed to talk about. Yeah, so I just...
Your involvement in the podcast, what do you bring to
Oh,
this?
that's it.
Come
That's
on.
it. See, I'm over 50 now. I forget all that sort of stuff.
I know. Me
But
neither.
no, I must admit, I was really chuffed to get this message to say, "Do you want to be on a podcast?" Because, like you, I'd been listening to podcasts and I could see the importance of them, and I thought, yes, because I'm a big believer in, if you stalk me on Facebook, you'll know I'm a big believer in meeting people, and as much as I try to do that, there's no better way than to meet our community around the world than do it by podcast, because it means you don't have to fly, like for us, 14 hours to get anywhere. And the feedback that we get, I have to admit that one of the things that the podcast has taught me is that it's okay to cry, because in nearly every episode, I cry. And there's a big, gruff Australian guy. Actually, a little story, and this is what I do as well. I was on a train. I was on a train from Los Angeles to Seattle. It's called the Coast Starlight. It weaves up the coast of California. And there was a writer on there writing about train travel. And she interviewed me while I was on the train and said, would you mind? Oh, yeah, sure, no problem. But then when she sent me the piece, it said this big bruiser of an Australian that was on the train, and that's how she described me. I thought, oh, okay. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying, I still remember. I use that now because as I try to do, I try to set an example for us fellas, and that's the best you can do, because us blokes, we don't listen to anything. No point trying to tell us what to do. But so you've got to lead by example. So this big bruiser of an Australian, that's what he does, and he cries, which is good. I might cry tonight too, so don't worry if I do.
So Michael, have you had many messages, or even Berenice or Sarah, from men who have listened that have said that it's made them feel much more entitled to cry as well?
I had a message from a chap in the east coast of USA. He had a very interesting story to tell, and that, as I said, I sent as soon as I got it, I'm off on Messenger to the girls. Oh my God, look what I've got! Look what I've got! Because it's that makes it all worth it. Without going into too much detail about his story right now, but it makes it all worth it. And now we chat, and I've introduced him to a few other guys in the community, so he's feeling a lot less alone right now.
Okay. So at More to Life, what we're always trying to get people to do is to, as I said in my introduction, is to use their existing talents to find new talents and to find new purposes and pathways in life that just gives their existence some meaning, because we all know what it feels like when you feel that you don't have a lot of meaning because you don't have children. And it's obvious, listening to the three of you, how much this podcast means to you and what it's given to you all.
Yeah, it's quite a hard one to answer, actually. Sort of, we have a competition of who's going to cry first, and you can place your bets. I might beat you here, Michael. I think for me, it's brought about some healing, I think, but also I think it's made it. I started off doing Walk in Our Shoes, and I think I mentioned this in one of the rehearsals that we had, or a chat last week, and I've said it before a few times, I think on the podcast, that it was quite isolating to do, because it's a website, and it wasn't until I went to one of the fertility fests that people came up to me and go, "Oh God, that means a lot to me." And I thought, "Oh, does it?" I was thinking of closing it down. I wasn't going to do it anymore because it felt so isolating. So I think probably the one thing I think the podcast has done is actually sort of taken me from being a designer and a bit of a techie kind of geek, I suppose, to someone who can actually just say, oh yeah, I know these people. It feels like more of a community to me. But I think most importantly, it's brought connections with our guests as well, and allowed us to do different things as well, and broaden our experiences. So for me, I've been able, I don't know kind of what I bring to the podcast, apart from I look at the website, the logo, the branding is all kind of me, and I put the stuff on the website when Michael's edited the audio and Sarah records it, but we all have different things. But I think, I couldn't, we're a team. If I have to do something on my own, like re-record something on my own, I'm a complete idiot. I don't know what to say. I just sit there going, I don't know, and I just repeat myself, and I fluff about, and I can't remember how to say the fullstoppod.com, all those sorts of things that I can't remember how to do. So we all bring something different. And I think for me, Sarah's, your ethics and the way that you ask questions and the depth that you bring to every episode, it always, after every episode, I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, she's so flipping clever. How does she know this stuff to us? You're just amazing. You're great.
Nosy.
Yeah, you are that too. But yes, aside from the nosiness.
No, I think that's the good thing about it. I think we bring it a bit of different stuff to it. I think that's why it works, because we've all got different perspectives. I think for me, it's helped me talk about it. I can write about it. I can talk about it from like a trainee counsellor's point of view, but talking about my own experiences, I was just very, very shut down. So I think that comes across in some of the episodes as well. You won't hear my voice when I'm getting upset or I'm getting a bit flappy, and I have to mute my microphone and stuff, because I really struggle with the emotions around it. I think the best episode for me was with Bibi Lynch, because I guess she's angry, and that's how I felt, and I've not been able to sort of verbalise that in a way that is kind of socially acceptable, if you see what I mean. You can't sort of go rah about the whole thing, and I think having Berenice and Michael there, in your corner, has really helped me just find the words and process it a bit more. So, and the whole community thing, I was just like, it didn't really chime and started doing this, because I was like, yeah, community, but it feels very disparate until you hear people talking about it and put a voice to it. And this podcast, for me, I'm so proud of it. I'm sort of talking about it with everyone. I'm like, oh God, I do a podcast. And I can't believe I'm involved with something so fantastic. I just get, my mum and dad are like, you must be so proud. And I'm like, the thing that I'm most proud of is the podcast. So yeah, that's what it does for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had a conversation in the past where we all recognise that we're in different positions on the path to acceptance, if you will. And so, yeah, it's really, but at the same time, the path will never end. Mm. But it's really good to be able to just give your own. Like, for instance, I'd like to think that Vicky and I are a fair way along, and. We've talked about how, Sarah, you probably not as far.
No.
And I think that's part of the chemistry of what we've got. I just had a thought then, and it's gone, which happens. This is a great thing about editing, so I can edit that bit out, but obviously we're not doing that today. But for me, one of the things that I'll speak for Vicky and I, because I do that a lot. But it was very isolating not having children, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but and that was a big thing for us. That was one of the biggest things that brought us to a point of depression. So I'm very mindful of that, and I'm a bit like a reformed smoker or a born again, in that. I want to break down every silo. I want everyone to meet everyone. Now, I know that can't happen, but again, by example, that's what I want to do. So, as I said to the girls the other day, the podcast makes it legit that I can reach out to people and say, "Do you want to meet up?" Which I have done for a few times now, and I've got a big list of people in the UK. I'm going to, my wife and I, in May, so we've got a big list of people we're going to meet. And that warms my heart, because excuse me, but because I know the pain that isolation gives.
I think that's
Right.
really important when we're recording, is that we're conscious that the people that are out there have arrived at the podcast in different ways, and lots of people don't listen to all of it. They listen to some of it. They dip in and dip out, and some things are more painful than others. I think the one thing that always pleased me was it our second episode, or was it the first one that we did, where someone said, you were all laughing, and they weren't expecting us to open it with laughing.
I think
I think
yeah.
that's it. Yeah, it was one of them, and it was. That's your dexterous editing as well, but there's always some point, I think, in the episodes where we'll just sit there and just, I don't know, we just start laughing. Or I think one of the funniest things that we had was when Tessa joined us for the writing one, and she joined, but we didn't realise she joined on Zoom, because I think there was us three and there were two others as well, and so it all goes off the edge of the top of the screen, and we had this voice going, hello, and we just fell about, and luckily it was Tess, and she knows us, which is such an utter relief, actually, to be fair, because we were just like, it's like that bit on the Muppets where they had the bit with the pigs in space and the voice above. That's what I kept thinking of. It's like, oh, hello. And we just gone, and we couldn't control ourselves. It was awful, because when one goes, the other goes, which is always quite entertaining. Anyway, it's all very relaxed, and we're not scripted either. I think there's a question about where the name came from, isn't there? As well, I think I've seen.
I'm just about to look down at the questions, but you certainly have a chat about that while I have a look.
We'll try and think about that. I think the name came actually from. Did it come from Jodie? It came from Jodie Day.
It did, yes.
Yeah, because we had all sorts of weird names, and we didn't really have anything. And Jodie mentioned it. I think I can't remember the whole story about that. Gosh.
Well, she's pretty good at coming up with things like that, and she said, "Well, what about a full stop? Because it is like you're doing a podcast about something that is a very defining moment in someone's life." So, yeah.
Then it became, I think, the start and the end as well, because it was like a stop and a start.
Yeah.
You stop one thing, you start another, and of course it was absolutely brilliant for the branding. So I was quite happy, and no one else owned the domain name, so it was like, right, well, we'll have that. So yeah, I think that was it, if I remember rightly. Anyway, so I hope that answers that question. If it doesn't, then ask again, or if there's anything else you want to know about the name. The one thing to check about names, though, is always just check, if you're going to do a podcast, that no one else has it. There is actually another Full Stop podcast, but it's not called exactly us, and it's not quite so active as we are. I think it might have ended, whatever it was. It wasn't the same thing. But also, again, we didn't want to necessarily be called childless in any way.
No. That's kind of it, isn't it, really? I think with the podcast, I think, you say people are surprised that we're laughing, but it's kind of there but not there, if you see what I mean. It's kind of, it's bringing the community together, but it's not what you want to talk about all the time. It's not, you know what I mean? We had Bibi Lynch on, and we were talking about pampas grass.
Pampas grass.
There's new education, I'd say. And then sorry?
It was, because I didn't go to that one, because I can't remember why I wasn't around anyway. So you two recorded that with Bibi, and I listened to it after. I was going, Pam, what? It was very surreal. I was like, oh, thank goodness I wasn't there. It could have gone even more off a tangent, but never mind. It was hilarious, actually.
But I thought the last one we did as well, is it Suzanne or Susan?
Susan Muir, yeah.
Susan Muir.
Yeah.
She was fantastic, wasn't she? So, although it got mentioned, it was kind of like the most inspiring story you've ever heard. You could listen to it even if you're not part of our community. She was just amazing. Go on, Michael, wax lyrical. You're the fan.
Tell us a story.
Well, so how did it go? So years ago, when I was a lot younger and thinner, I was quite adventurous, and there was a magazine in Australia called Wild that was about all these people doing fantastic, adventurous things. And I'd be reading, going, "I wish I could do that. I wish I could do that. Oh, look at that!" And it turns out that Suzanne and her husband were one of the people that contributed to that magazine. And it wasn't until, I think, the day before we actually did the interview, I've done the, oh my God, it's them. And yeah, I was, yeah.
So what did they do?
Total fanboy. Sorry?
What did they do, Michael? What was the fantastic thing they did?
Okay, well, her husband has climbed Mount Everest multiple times. He's walked across the deserts of Australia. They've canoed across Lake Eyre, which is a large saltwater lake that only appears a few. There's a whole list of things, but they are absolutely inspirational. And if you're after a bit of inspiration, listen to the podcast and listen to the ocean-going yacht from Fiji. And I'll leave it like that as a little teaser for people.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It was quite gratifying because I get accused of being a bit of a fangirl sometimes, and then to see Michael reduced to like that is just, that is fantastic. It was worth every minute for that. It was like, yeah, look at you, you fanboy. But yeah, we met some fantastic people on the journey as well. I think that's most amazing thing, and brought people together as well. I think that matters. But apart from bringing ourselves together, is that like a term? I don't know. Maybe I'm going off on one. It's 8 o'clock. I've had a long day. I was up at 6 myself, and I'm not stringing sentences together very well at the moment. But we brought, we obviously have learned more about each other, but I think also we're learning more about other people as well, because you don't have to be already, and it's people watching this thinking, oh, I need to be famous, or I need to have done a book, or I ought to have this, or I ought to have that. Then absolutely not absolutely. We want to bring out all sorts of different voices, and be a bit more diverse as well. One of the things we're very conscious of is that we're 3 white people sitting here, and actually we want to be more diverse than that as well. So looking at people that we can bring into the podcast to be part of episodes as well, so we can increase what we're doing, because infertility doesn't just affect us, it affects lots of people from all over the place in different parts of the world, and different demographics as well. So that's really important.
And that's the thing. That's a good point, actually, Berenice, because the episode that's coming out soon for Mother's Day, we had a brand new voice, didn't we, that I connected with on Twitter, and she's a journalist, but she was sort of saying, oh God, I don't know what I'm going to say, but she had a story, and as long as you've got a voice and a story and you're willing to share it, then please come on, because we would love to connect with you, talk to you, get to know you, and yeah, you just got to be willing to do it, really, haven't you? It's quite a thing, because she was quite at the beginning of her journey, as it was, into this community. So it was interesting, I think, having spoken to so many established people within the community, to actually introduce somebody that was fairly new to it. And I think it was, I think it's going to be, it made for a good recording, because she was so new. It will appeal to people that are, basically just coming into this realisation that they are going to be part of this community.
Yeah, and we just try and make it as welcoming as possible. I think when you come onto the podcast, then you'll see a setup ever so much like this screen. It's just like this, to be honest, and we just chat at the beginning, and I think that we all have something different to sort of talk about and to share, but we all just try to be as open and as honest and as and I think it's the fact that it's edited as well makes a big difference, and there's that trust. I mean, I do listen to the episodes once they come back. August is confession time now, because you don't know this.
Go on.
Well, I don't get a lot, because actually making the podcast go up onto the website, and then of course doing the newsletter. So if you sign up to our newsletter, you get an advanced kind of listen on the website. So you can go and do that if you want to. So that happens. So I'm away with the that's my typing impression, by the way. Typing away like mad on the newsletter, and then it all goes onto the website, and all of that picks up, and I have to check it all goes onto all of like Spotify and Apple, and why am I waving my hands around, but all of our channels, and also Podbean as well. So all these things all happen in the background, so I'm kind of got one ear on what's been recorded, but invariably actually what I tend to do is it just goes up, and I haven't listened to all of it, but actually it's just that absolute trust, I think, in Sarah to listen to what Michael has edited, because you invariably listen to the whole thing, and in Michael just to do a brilliant job, because I know that he does, and you just trust those people. And I think that's, for me, it, as well as collaborating, it's absolute trust in somebody. And I know that whatever was said, and I think the mental health episode was probably the one that kind of threw us all together a bit, because all the other ones we've done male infertility, and that's a big thing that we want to carry on doing, by the way, is Michael, you look after that whole episode, and that's so important, but we talked about mental health, and I don't know why I did it, and I've no idea to this day, but we just sort of sat there, and it was just like, well, okay, I'll talk about what happened to me, which I honestly hadn't spoken to anyone about it. I'd kind of talked to my husband a bit about it, but I hadn't really spoken to anybody else like that at all. It was just that I just trusted you two just to sit and to listen and to say the right things, and to reduce me to tears, but also make me, smile again. And that's that. You can't put a price on that. You absolutely can't. It's so it's almost part of sort of my therapy in a way, that episode. But I think that was a standing moment for me, where I think the podcast became something that we thought we could do, or I thought these guys could do, and I thought, I don't know that I can do, but I'm just going to come along and see what happens. And then it became something a bit bigger, because it's like, oh God, I've just said something that could actually be quite profound, and I never really thought about that before. So that was important. So there's my confession, somewhere wrapped up in all of that, but I tried to make this I've done a really good politician and gone, but look at this.
Right.
That's a really good point though, Berenice, because that's all right.
Oh God.
But
it's these two, they drive me to madness.
I can imagine.
Yeah, totally.
But it's a really good point that you made, because earlier on, Michael talked about you all being at different places on the journey of coming to acceptance about your childlessness, or being mediated, or however you want to term it. Actually, by doing the podcast, each of you is probably moving a little bit further along the journey every time you do one. So the benefits for you in just working together with other people that you trust are obviously helping you cope with the challenges that childlessness brings into your everyday lives in other ways. If you spoke to somebody who told you that they had a vision of a way that they felt that they could use some of their talents and their knowledge to help them come to terms with their childlessness, which is basically what the three of you have done, isn't it, really? What tips and advice would you give them? Obviously, the first one you've sort of answered is that find other people that you trust to do it with. That's come across really strongly tonight. What are there any other top tips that you can think of that would help them to do that with a little bit more success? Although I don't think success is necessarily the aim of doing these things anyway, but do you know what I mean? Any top tips you could give them?
I've got a few, but do you guys have any? I'm where I've spoken a bit. You've probably got heaps of advice more than me.
Okay, I'll start. Be open to everything, in a way that, I'm as an example, I'm not a religious person, but I'm actually quite looking forward to talking with other people about and learning what it means to them, how their framework of life is affected by, or is either affected or supported, by their religion and culture and things like that. So, my advice would be say be open to everything and make it look at it like it will enrich you, because that's what it does for me.
Yeah.
Can't think of another one right now, so someone else better go.
Sarah?
I think for me, the thing that I've probably learnt most about is finding value in other things. So, I was very much, I'll be honest with you, I was totally obsessed with having children. I had nothing else was going on for me. It became very one-dimensional. So obviously when that dream finished, it was like, oh, flipping heck, what do I do now? Life became very boring. And I think for me, in sort of doing this, I've rediscovered passion again. I've rediscovered something that I enjoy and something that gives me a spark. So I think for me, it's, find that one thing that you can do, but make sure you look after yourself as well, because there have been, as Berenice mentioned, the mental health episode was flipping heck. That was a tough one. I think we all kind of went to bits on that one after what Berenice sort of divulged in there, which was incredibly brave, but also, it chimes with your own stuff. So make sure you look after yourself, and you've got plenty of stuff that you can fall back on and give yourself a break on, because as much as I love doing the podcast, some of the episodes you come away from and think, oh, flipping heck, I need to take a break, or I need to go and do something, get rid of all this energy and stuff. But yeah, that would be my top tip.
Okay, thank you. Berenice, I know you think that you're always talking, but we'd love to hear your top tip.
I've forgotten it now. I'm a bit blown away by these two. I think make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. For you or for others. Don't. I think it's very tempting to sort of go off on your own little journeys, and then we can easily do it, I think, in the podcast, and we have to kind of make it has to be about the people, our guests, about the listeners, and then somewhere within that it's about us as well. But I think it's really kind of what Sarah said there, is about making sure that we're looking after each other, because it takes a lot of time. I think it takes much more time than I'd ever envisage, and oh gosh, I wish I could do it all the time. I wish somehow we could make this a full-time job, because I'd be so happy to do this all the time. I know we all would be, but we have to make sure that we've got support, I think, whilst we're sort of getting through all of this, because it's a lot. It's mentally quite draining sometimes.
Okay, so we've gone from those top tips to a question that's come in, which is looking for top tips for coping with Mother's Day. Now, I know you're going to do a podcast about this, aren't you? So you've got a podcast coming up about this. I'm also going to be sending out a More to Life e-newsletter about this, and what I've actually done this year, which some of you might have read on social media, is I've asked the community to give their top tips for coping with Mother's Day. So that will come out in a More to Life e-newsletter in the next week or so, because it's not long until Mother's Day now, is it? When is it? Is it a week Sunday?
22nd.
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 Yeah. So that will be coming out soon too. When is your podcast for that going out?
15th. Yeah, 15th, Sunday the 15th, and we're just going to release it to the world. We're not going to do a preview of it with a newsletter, mostly because I'm away, but it'll just literally just go straight out, because I think as soon as we can get it out there, then the sooner I think it will help people, because it's brilliant, actually. There's lots of advice, but I think just our two interviewees are fantastic. And to give a shout out to Sevilla Morgan, who actually is a podcaster herself, and she was our guest, and she's just fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Lovely. Okay, there's a few more questions come in. Okay. I agree and think that the mental health issues become as hard to deal with as any treatment. Do you think there is an end to the sadness? Can it really be achieved Is acceptance the key to be able to lead a fulfilling life? Wow, that's a big question.
It is.
Huge question.
It's
It is.
lots of questions.
I guess the three of us are kind of evidence that it changes. I mean, obviously, I'm quite early on in the sort of getting to acceptance, and obviously, Michael and Berenice are a little bit further on than me. So I think from my perspective, you know, I think it does change. I think within my own relatively short amount of time, it has changed for me. And I sort of blog about it a lot because I know that at the beginning, the grief and all of those emotions are just so relentless. And I now know that I have more good days than bad. You know, I can get up, I can shower, I can go to work, I can get things done. Whereas at one point, even getting out of bed was a real struggle. So I think for me, I guess it's benchmarking where you are now to where you were is probably the real key thing, because acceptance can feel like a bit of a holy grail. Some days it does to me. You know, it feels like a airy fairy thing that you're never going to reach. But if you look at how far you've already come, I think that really helps you appreciate that you're stronger than you perhaps think you are, and you give yourself credit for. So it's a continual journey, for a bit of want of a cliched term, but it is.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I talked about this in a World Childless Week some time ago, where, and this is my own personal view, of course, but the trauma of not having children is a trauma, and the key is how to manage that, how to live with that. It's something you'll never forget. It's something you will always be there, but the key is how to manage that. And from our experience, it's been around being able to talk about it, because then that helps you desensitize, you know, around that. And so in essence, you've got to own it. You've got to realise that I'm childless, and I know it's not something that people want to think about, but that's the reality of it. And the reality of it is you've got to own it, and you've got to manage it. And you know, there are multitudes of ways of doing it, but I'm a big believer in that. Yes, there is happiness, because you will be able to manage that grief much better as time goes on. I'm not a therapist, so I don't know how to do that, but that's why it's important for us, or for us to have a laugh at the beginning and the end of our show, because it's symbolic for that.
Mm. The only thing I wanted to add was just that I was told a long time ago that grief is a bag, and some days it's heavy and it weighs one hell of a lot, and you can share that load with friends. That's what I would say. I'm going to get emotional now, but that's kind of how I view the podcast, how I view having friendships, and how I know that there are people within the community, and I may not even see them day to day. I mean, you know, I haven't seen Michael for 2 years, and I saw Sarah in May last year. But it doesn't matter if they're people you know immediately, or they're people that are the other side of the world. The fact that you can actually just go like, I'm having a really bad day. Or it might be someone that's in your home, it might be someone around you that's there for you. But your grief is this weight, but it does weigh lighter some days. I think it's always part of you, and it is a grief, and it will always be there, but you can share that load, and you can use your friends and ask your friends to help you. Don't be alone. I think we always say that. Michael says at the end of every episode, and I think that's absolutely true. You really aren't alone at all. There are many of us there in different ways, and different stories, but all our stories lead to one path. So I think, you know, we all have different stories. The way that we got here is all different for all of us. Similar but different. So you know, we take sort of lessons from those stories as well, but you're not alone.
I think acceptance is relative as well, because if somebody had asked me 3 years ago if I'd accepted, and it's been a long time, for me it's been over, I hate to say this now, but 12 years since I stopped trying to have children. So it's been a long time for me. And if somebody had asked me 3 years ago, do you accept it? I would have said yes. However, every day something happens that tells me that actually I've got a little bit more of my mojo back, if that makes sense. You know, like I find myself laughing again, whereas in the past, sometimes when I was out socially, I'd find it difficult to remember what it was like to have a sense of humour. You know, but now I find myself laughing. I find myself even having the confidence to crack jokes in front of a lot of people. Whereas before I felt so isolated by my childlessness that I lost my confidence and thought that any joke that I would make wouldn't be funny anyway. So do you know what I mean? So I think it's all relative, and through time, I think you come to accept that the holy grail that Sarah talked about of acceptance is different for everybody, and actually just making some progress along the journey is worthwhile. And I think that's where I am with that. But that was a really good question, wasn't it?
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
To think about tonight, that was a really interesting question. And it's so obvious for you guys, and Berenice, you especially tonight, you really have talked about how important it is to you to know that you can just contact Sarah and Michael at any time if you feel like you're having a bad day, and that's okay. So all these little important things that we begin to rebuild in our lives, the sum of them all, one day you will realize that, hey, actually there is meaning beyond children, and there is existence beyond children. But yes, I have had that traumatic experience that will never leave me, but I'm actually quite enjoying life again, and that's an incredible place to get to. And for all those people that aren't there, don't be hard on yourself and say, what am I doing wrong because I'm not there yet? Because it's not about effort, it is about healing and time and support through things like the podcast that you're talking about, and friendship, and believing in yourself again. All these things can come together to help you find that acceptance. And it's not supposed to be me talking tonight. See, this is what you guys do. This is what you guys do. You bring people out.
Right, you're on the podcast now. We're just going to get you from the podcast. You just got yourself a guest in right there, Heather.
Okay. Right. I'm sure this will come up eventually, but I would love to hear about your plans for your upcoming anniversary party and meetup. Wish I could be there.
Oh, well, why aren't you? Come on. Get thee down to London. Michael, go. Tell them about it. Come on. Because you're doing
Anniversary party.
Yeah, Michael's doing something amazingly special. Just for us. Not really.
So on May the 9th at and the Littleton Arms?
Yes.
Yep,
Yes.
Littleton Arms in Camden, the Camden town, London, the place of my ancestors, by the way. I've got a story about that. Anyway,
you got to be there, and he'll tell you the story.
Yes, I'll tell you the story. But we're going to be there for our first birthday party. Vicky and I are coming across from the UK. She cannot wait to meet everyone. Me too. I'm giving out free hugs because I do that. That's what Aussies do. So if you turn up, don't feel uncomfortable, but Aussies hug when they meet. So yeah, and we've got some really interesting people who have already said they're coming along. So if you want to come, please register on our website, www.thefullstoppod.com, and come along, because you'll get to meet us all.
Yeah, great.
And I will cry, I'm sure.
Can you guys believe that you're at the stage where you're at an anniversary party already?
No.
You ask us in about 10 years and we still be sitting here in whatever state that we're in 10 years, still broadcasting a podcast. I think, yeah, it's amazing. Most podcasts fail at episode 8, by the way. They stop at episode 8. That's the average statistic for a podcast. I know you like your stats over there in Australia, but yeah, most most podcasts stop at episode 8 and progress no further. So I think to get past episode 8 was a milestone for us. We didn't have
we've got a big list of things we want to tackle, talk about, achieve. So I think we've got at least another year.
We got loads. We got several years. I mean, it's terrible. We're not allowed. Sarah and I aren't allowed. No, actually, no, that's not true. Because it always seems to involve me. Is that one of you will go onto Messenger and go, chat about something or another. I've got an idea about something, and then we'll go off on this chat, and then the third person will come in. So Sarah and I did that quite recently. That's how the birthday party came up. And then Michael sort of woke up, and because it's a great thing about the podcast is it's 24/7. And Michael woke up, and it was just like this stream on Twitter, on Messenger rather, where we created a birthday party. I'm really sorry. We know you're coming to the UK, but this is what you're doing when you get here. It was hilarious. We're very sorry. I'm not allowed to be on Messenger without supervision anymore, because the wheels just fly off and it's really bad. Sorry, stop laughing. Anyway.
Okay, well, talking about stopping, okay, we've got a couple more questions which I'm going to try and do, and then we need to see a slide so that people know how they can actually access your podcast. So let's have a look. Great news about the Mother's Day podcast. Thank you very much. Will you please do a Father's Day one too?
Michael.
Father's Day
yes,
podcast?
definitely. Most definitely. I shouldn't say it like that, but I'm cultivating a group of men who I know will be only too pleased to be part of that. So, it's in the works, and so we will. Yes.
Okay, final question then. In new situations, I still stay clenched, waiting for the "do you have kids" question. Do you guys now get it into conversation first in order to put other people on the back foot? That's my goal.
Oh, good question.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a good question.
About this Mother's Day pod, we were talking about with one of the guests, Ali, and she was sort of saying about it, and I so when it happens now, there used to be a time I'd go very quiet and sort of back away, but now I talk about it. You're going to get the question because it's just what people do, isn't it? They want to know, and it's an easy in, I think, for small talk. So now I just sort of say, no, I can't have children, and if they're uncomfortable, it's fine, but it might actually start a conversation. It did for me, actually, just randomly last week at a business meeting for something else, and I was talking to this chap about my other hat, which is this, and some of the other bits I do. And we started talking about it, and he happened to mention he did have a family, but he'd had problems. And so we started a conversation around that, and that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't, sort of done the bombshell about, well, do you? So it's kind of, given it a year ago, I would have got very defensive and shut down. But now I'm very honest, and I think because the podcast has made me able to be honest, we had a conversation about it, and it was interesting to see his take on it, because he was, despite the fact he's got a family, he was still very cut up about all the things that they'd gone through. So yeah, it's not a nice question, but it can be a conversation starter.
Yeah, I think so. I tend to just go with the preamble of, this might make you feel uncomfortable, but and I tend to be a bit more. I think that when you talked about sort of where we are in recovery, I would probably sort of say, if we had to say this it's sort of Sarah, me, Michael, in that kind of line, I think, of our recovery. So I sort of started off somewhere at the beginning and then progressed a bit further along because of the podcast. So these days I tend to say I've had failed IVF and miscarriages, so I can't have children, to sort of set the scene that actually it's maybe not something I want to talk about, but I tend to be a bit more open, because I just think that the people who go through IVF and it's failed them, And I think the way I say that is important. It's failed them, not the other way around. And I think that those people deserve a voice. Really, really, really do. So for me, that's really important. So I will say more than I used to, because it's going to come up. As Sarah said, it is going to come up. It's like a nice shortcut, isn't it? Where do you work? People fail that with me, because it's kind of, my working life is kind of a little bit sort of different hats. And then the kind of kids thing, people are like, oh, I don't know what to say to you. How do you spell your name? That's the other one. All those things. People run out of questions for someone like me. It's a little bit difficult, I think, and it's going to happen. So, yeah, it depends. I think whether you want to sort of, I don't know, whether you want to just say sadly I can't, tragically I can't, or just simply I can't, and move the subject on. I can't. Could we talk about something else? That's okay too. I think that gives people a steer. One of the questions that I had recently at an event I went to was, what was it? What made you happy today, or something like that? And it was just a very generic question. So, I could just sit and say, oh, my dog, and we had a conversation about dogs. So I didn't actually ever come into it. So I think perhaps sometimes, if it's sort of events that you go to regular, networking or business or training events, and I think you've got a good cause to say to people, actually, could we just change the way that this is set up? Can we do something different? If you feel that you want to do that too. Back to Michael's sort of theme of owning it and thinking that's a different way of doing something. I think most events we tend to find, I found that before I was kind of sit at an event and go like, oh, I've got to put up with this. But actually, even if you don't do the same thing at the time, you can say something maybe in the questionnaire or feedback afterwards. I think that's perfectly okay to do that. And of course, you've got lots of resources that you can cite as well these days and say, well, actually, there's Gateway Women, there's obviously the podcast, there's World Childless Week, there's lots of resources where you can go, well, actually, look, this is a thing. It's not just me saying this, there's everybody else as well. I hope that helps a little bit. I know it's a difficult thing. I empathise with you. I struggle with it too. We all have. So, yeah. Maybe it's something we can talk about perhaps I know we're talking about language of childlessness at some point. It's something that Sarah and I went off in one of our little messenger conversations with and ended up creating an episode, and about the language of how we talk about what we do and those difficult conversations. So that might be something people might be interested in finding out a bit more, or coming on and being a guest as well. That's also cool too.
Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
I knew you was going to ask me this, and I have, and hang on, I've got an angel that sits on that shoulder, and I've got a devil that sits on this shoulder. So when I go to events, I gauge the event, and sometimes it may come out as, look, sadly that we don't have children, because then of course it can open a conversation. 9 times out of 10, if it's with blokes, it won't. So, that's the angel talking. Now, the devil on the ears usually says, I might just keep that back a little bit, and if someone pisses me off, I'll bring it out and just make them feel, get them on the back foot. And I know that's terrible to say, but sometimes that's what I do.
And
So,
you've got to that stage though, Michael, through time, obviously, that you're able to sort of control it and gauge how you're going to do it when you actually get to an event.
yes.
We've got a really good recording of a webinar by Shannon Vandermark called Changing the Fairy Tale Narrative. And during this MTL webinar, which you can just find on our website, where it's just got the recording, basically what she does is she talks about how just change the narrative that people have in social situations, to realize that not everybody has this fairy tale life and happy ending that society wants you to have. So she talks a lot. I mean, you need to go and watch the webinar recording, but she basically talks a lot about starting conversations like, anybody seen a good movie lately? Just not always focusing on the person and really making the person open up about themselves when you've just met them. You know, give them time to feel comfortable with you. And this webinar was really good. And for anybody that doesn't know how to deal with that question, I would say watch the recording of that webinar, because it really is great. Listen, guys, I've had an absolutely fantastic time tonight, but before we go, it's really important that we see the slide. So who's going to share the slide? Is it you, Berenice, that's going to share it?
It is. I'm really worried about this, so I'm going to, because it's PowerPoint and it's not my native place, so I'm actually going to go over to here, and I'm just going to do that, and that should share that. I'm going to bring that up to there, and look, I'm going to do that. Oh, look, see? Okay.
There you go.
Fantastic.
You got skills.
This is a joint effort, because Sarah created it and I'm sharing it, because there we are. So that's some of the things that we are planning. So we've got some stuff in there that we're a bit nervous of. Menopause, we're quite nervous about. I think that's fair to say. But you know, anything like that you want to be part of the podcast, then please do. And you've got all of the links at the bottom there for how to find us. Basically, if you need anything, go to the website. Everything's on the website, including all the links to our social media, and of course all the episodes as well.
Generally, if I forget what your website actually is, I just Google Full Stop Podcast and manage to find it that way. So that's always another way.
Oh, the SEO's working. That makes me happy.
Yeah. Did you make that happen then, Berenice? That when I
somehow,
Google that,
yeah. Or magic fairies, not me.
Yeah,
no.
all these
Magic internet fairies.
Yeah, all these trade secrets are coming out now. But anyway, okay. Thank you, Berenice, for sharing that. Thank you, all three of you, for tonight. Now, a lot of you might be wondering why there is